Hello again, students of grammaire et thème, grammaire thème et grammaticale. This is our last video, and this will be I'm just gonna sort of show you how you can analyze the text. Once again, we've done this in class. This is just so you have sort of another example. This is something I would have liked to review if we had the chance. So this is a text that I'm going to include as an attached document, so you'll have it. And if you print up this text, or if you have it somewhere that you can, it'll be easier, hopefully easier. It'll be much easier to follow along if you print up this text, for the sake of simplicity. So we're just going to go sentence by sentence. We're not going to do the whole thing. We're going to do the first 2 or 3 sentences. That way you'll sort of feel more comfortable with when I'm going to ask you to do this yourself very shortly. So first sentence, we have like me, she'd run out on all that old dull white stuff they taught you at school and college. So all you're asked to do is find subordinate clauses and give the structure and function. No problem. So in that first sentence, what are the subordinate clauses? I'm going to say that like me, just going to say it's not going to be a subordinate clause because it's not a verbal structure, right? It's actually just a prepositional phrase. We have me, the complement of like is me, which is a pronoun, which is a nominal compound. I could say like Steve, like this person, right? So that's that. I mean, if you wanted to, you could underline like me and say the structure of prepositional phrase function. That would be, I would say, that adverbial. She did that in the same way. That would be a sort of a manner adverbial. But you don't need to, right? But just to say that's not a subordinate clause. It's not a verbal structure. Okay, so where do we have a verbal structure? So she'd run out of all that old stuff, that old dull white stuff they taught about. So we look at, after white stuff, we have they taught. We have a verb there, they taught. So we notice that they taught you at school and college. That is going to be, a clause. They is the subject. Taught is going to be the verb. You is going to be the complement of the verb taught, right? And at school and college, once again, that is another prepositional phrase. School and college are both complements of the preposition at, right? And notice that's saying where the teaching occurred, right? So we could say that the structure of at school and college is going to be a prepositional phrase, right? And its function is going to be adverbial because it's saying where the teaching occurred, right? We would call it as a place adverbial, complément circonstanciel de lieu. D'accord? Ça dit à quel endroit a eu lieu l'enseignement, right? So that means that it is a part of, because it gives information about teaching, right? It's going to be a part of that clause that teaching is sort of the main verb of. So that means we have identified a clause, which is going to be they taught you at school and college. Right? We can just write. So it's very convenient. I sort of use this system of brackets. Right? We have our little brackets here, and I have a 1 here. So we've identified that clause. Now the question is, what kind of a clause is it? Right. So we've kind of seen that we've noticed that we've had nominal clauses, those that have nominal functions, that these are clauses that can be subjects or direct objects and so on. And what we've seen in the second half of this class, we've seen clauses that can be post modifiers in noun phrases. And these are primarily going to be the positive clauses or relative clauses, and they're part of noun phrases, right? So if we look at this clause, they taught you at school and college, we say, what is this a part of, right? Well, we say, actually, what is this? Or another way to ask that question, we say, what is it a part of? What does that give information about? Well, it gives information about the stuff. Which stuff? Oh, this stuff they taught you at school and college. It's fine-tuning that notion of stuff. Stuff is obviously a very broad notion, and it tells you, it gives a more precise, it refines what that refers to. So that means it's giving information about stuff. Stuff is the head noun in the noun phrase. All that old, dull, white. Notice old, dull, and white are going to be pre-modifiers. Stuff is going to be the head noun. And they taught you at school and knowledge. Since it gives you information about stuff, it's a part of that noun phrase. It's the post-modifier, right? So we could even start, if you like, we can go backwards and say, oh, okay, function is post-modifier. So 1, function, I'll just write post-modifier. Because it's a part of that noun phrase, and it's giving information about. So it's the post modifier in that noun phrase. The noun phrase being all that old dull white stuff they taught you at school and college. That's the noun phrase, and that is the post modifier of it. So the structure, now, so seeing it's a post modifier in that noun phrase, okay, there aren't 3 million kinds of structures that can be post modifiers. We've seen that we can have verb ing clauses. I could say that white stuff lying on the floor, something like that. They could be it could be an infinitive clause. That could be another structure that could be post modifier. The white stuff to know, I could say, and then we can have a positive clause, and a positive clause would be something that's equivalent to stuff. Stuff equals the stuff is. But here we can't really think of an equivalence. The stuff is not. We would not say the white stuff is that they taught you. It doesn't make any sense. There's no equivalency between stuff and this clause. So it's not going to be a positive. And the positives are pretty rare. We've seen that before. We've already discussed this. But here we're going to say that actually what we have here is a relative clause with the zero relative pronoun. And we can kind of prove that by saying, we could have written, we can write other possible relative pronouns. Instead of zero, we could use that, which can be a relative pronoun, and which can be a relative pronoun too. So we could say the white stuff that they taught you at school and college, the white stuff which they taught you at school and college. That works. So we're going to, we could make more tests, but that we've discussed that in more detail. So this first clause, right, is going to be a relative clause. That's the structure, and the function is going to be a post modifier. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next sentence, and it's a little bit unusual. It's sort of the writer's kind of pushing the limits of grammar, because you'll notice we have this sentence that begins with but she wasn't lazy, she was educating herself. Now it's true that if it was sort of more correct, we could have a comma there instead of a period. We could say, like me, she had run out on all that old adult white stuff they taught you at school and college, comma, but she wasn't lazy, she was educating herself. So if you notice that what we saw before is we noticed that but is a coordinator, right? It's not a subordinator. So I'm not asking you to identify coordinate clauses. You don't need to say anything here. You might want, if you prefer, you can say that but she wasn't lazy and she was educating herself are two coordinated clauses, but you don't have to, right? There's no need to say that. I'm only asking you, if you remember this, to identify subordinate clauses. So we don't need to do anything in that second sentence, okay? Now let's look at the first one. She knew what she wanted to learn and where it was. She just had to shovel it all into her head. Okay, fine. So we can go along sort of one step at a time. So let's look at the first half of the sentence, because notice we have two coordinated things. We have she knew what she wanted to learn and where it was. Coordinated, we have our what we call our semicolon, which is the point virgule after was, right here. Where is it? No, I'm sorry. Right here, that's our semicolon, right? She just had to shovel into her head. If we wanted to, you could say that the first part, she knew what she wanted to learn and where it was, is coordinated with she just had to shovel it all into her head. But that's not part of the assignment. You don't need to, but it might make it easier for you if you want to indicate that. No problem. But you wouldn't be penalized either way for it. But here there's just simply coordinated clauses, right? But notice we're interested in subordinated clauses, right? So we're going to look at the first part. We have she knew what she wanted to learn and where she was. Now here we've seen this before. You look at this. We see these WH words, what and where, and they introduce verbal structures. She wanted to learn after what she and after where it was. These are two verbal structures. So we can say, here we have two clauses, right? So first thing we might want to do is just identify them before we go farther. So I'm just going to put brackets around what she wanted to learn. That'll be 1. And the second one's going to be, 1. The second one, is going to be where it was. That'll be 2. Okay. So here notice we have two clauses, and we can pretty much we have this and here, which is a coordinator. Now we have two coordinated clauses. So as we've seen before, it's easier just to write 1 and 2 are coordinated. Now, since we're familiar with doing this thing, that means we can just look at one of them, right? If she knew what she wanted to do. What she wanted to learn, and notice that where it was is just going to be basically the clause of the same nature that's coordinated to it. All you really need to analyze is she knew what she wanted to learn. And you can know that since 1 and 2 are coordinated, they're going to have the same structure and function. So let's just concentrate on she knew what she wanted to learn. And this is something we've seen before in the first semester. We should understand it better because we studied relative clauses. Notice, so we have this WH word followed by something that would have been a sentence. She wanted to learn could have been a sentence. What makes it subordinated, right? So we do have a subordinated clause, but we have a special kind of subordinated clause that what we call a nominal relative. Notice we could write she knew the thing that, right? That means what is a WH word that contains a relative clause that and its antecedent thing, right? Was equals the thing that, ce que en français, right? Which means that within that WH word we have ce, which is the antécédent nominal, and que, which is pronom relatif. So that's what we call a fused or a nominal relative. So that means since what is a nominal relative pronoun, right? That means we have a nominal relative clause, right? So that'll be the structure. So 1 and 2, we're going to say they're the same. Structure of 1 is going to be nominal relative clause. And that it can also, as you remember, that can also be referred to as a fused relative clause. So we call it a fused relative clause because there is that antecedent that is contained within the WH word. And now we're going to look at the function, right? So function. And to look at the function, notice that if you remember, we said that nominal relative clause is what we call a nominal clause, so it has a nominal function. Namely, this is going to be things like subjects, direct objects, and so on. So if we look and say, what is the function of that group of words, and we can sort of replace it with a noun phrase, and that'll make it more obvious. So we could say she knew this thing. Why not? So if we say she knew this thing, it becomes fairly obvious that that's the direct object. So that is going to be the function of those words. You know, that what you want of that. En français, on parle de la complétive. Complétive qui a une fonction nominale, à savoir complément d'objet direct. So she knew. Function of that will be direct object. And notice that will be the same thing for 1 and 2. What you wanted to learn is structure, nominal relative clause, function, direct object, and it's the same thing for where it was, right? We just have 2 different types of nominal relative clauses. They have the same structure, nominal relative clause, and the same function, direct object. So that's why we did what we saw in the previous video. Under 2, we just wrote sort of ditto, meaning that number 2 has the same structure and function as 1 because they're coordinated, right? So I'll write direct object. And I think I'm going to stop there. I don't want to get. I think if you understand that, you're fine for pretty much everything. I just want to. That's sort of a textual application. I could do this whole thing, but I'm not sure you would watch the whole thing. You don't feel. Don't feel overly intimidated by this. Now, I'm going to, give a more detailed description of what I expect you to do, but I'm going to ask you to, write your own texts and then, do this kind of analysis in your own text.